I tell you, the left is becoming quite dangerous. On the weekend, mobs went to the homes of US Supreme Court judges to intimidate the judges about to declare there is actually no constitutional right to an abortion. That abortion laws in the US must be decided instead by politicians in each state. But here is the mob outside the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
Keep abortion safe and legal. Keep abortion safe and legal. Keep abortion safe and legal.
Can you imagine how scared Kavanaugh's wife and young daughters inside that house would be? And here is the protest outside the home of the Chief Justice, John Roberts.
The whole world is watching!
The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching!
A far-left group shut down DC. It's linked to Antifa, is also advertising a protest outside the home of another Conservative Justice of the Supreme Court, Samuel Alito, later today. And another far-left group published a map showing the homes of other judges. Antifa has also been publishing this incitement to terrorism, a picture of an activist with a Molotov cocktail. Slogan, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. And already an anti-abortion organisation's office in Wisconsin has been firebombed and had that same slogan painted on their building with an Antifa logo. Now, the White House had a chance last week to get ahead of this terror. White House spokesman Jen Psaki was asked straight out to condemn this intimidation and refused.
He doesn't care if they're protesting outside the Supreme Court or outside someone's private residence.
I don't have an official U.S. government position on where people protest.
What a disgusting response. Joining me is Brendan O'Neill, political editor of the online magazine Spiked. Brendan, what do you make of all this?
I think it's really shocking. I think it's crossing a line. I'm fully in favour of the right to protest. I'm fully in favour of people gathering in public spaces and making noise and making demands and putting pressure on politicians. Of course, that is part of political life. But you don't protest outside someone's private residence. You don't protest outside someone's home. Firstly, because their families are in there and their families have nothing to do with these political issues. And also because it's intimidating. It is meant to be threatening. It's a way of saying, we know where you live and we're going to make your life miserable right in the heart of your private life until you do what we want you to do. It is completely the wrong way to go about political change, and it is incredibly menacing. And it was really shocking when Jen Psaki couldn't even bring herself to say, we don't think people should protest outside private homes.
I think this is amazing. Why would she not have a response? I mean, I would think, never mind an official response, there's a human response. You do not endorse, I would have thought, any kind of harassment of judges at home where the implication is the crowds do not want those judges to decide a legal question by the law, but by the fear of the mob outside their home. The White House has to have you've got to respond to that.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, I guess the argument some people would make is that the American state is forbidden by constitutional law from interfering with the right to protest. But these officials are not forbidden from saying, listen, don't do this. It's immoral. It's wrong. It's threatening to protest in that particular place. You know, it's very easy for them to make that very simple moral argument that most people agree with. But I think there's something else going on here too, because if you look at these recent protests, also the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020 and other recent incidents, I think some of these protests almost get a very subtle green light from the liberal elite. If you think about how the BLM riots, people refused to call them riots. They said they were justified. They said this stuff was understandable. It was not as destructive as some in the right-wing media were claiming. And it was almost a subtle nod to these protests to go ahead. And I think there are sections of the American establishment now, the liberal establishment, that use these kinds of menacing mobs as a form of political leverage. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's an element of that going on here too.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, you recall the Democrat politician Maxine Waters telling protesters to go and chase Donald Trump officials in the street or in the shops and, get in their face. And you recall Kamala Harris, now Vice President, is actually raising money for protesters, for Black Lives Matter people who'd been arrested for firearms offences or setting fire to things, and she was raising bail money for them. Brendan, we've talked before about the riots in Sweden over the last month, riots mainly by immigrants in heavily immigrant areas after an anti-immigration politician burned the Koran. It was about free speech or whatever. Sweden's left-wing Prime Minister, she's been unusually honest about what's going on. Tell us about it.
She has been. So Magdalena Andersson is the Prime Minister, and she, following these riots in April last month, there were riots by largely Muslim mobs rioting about the desecration of a copy of the Quran. And she said, listen, there's a problem in this country. We have a crime wave, which Sweden does have a crime wave. It's got bombings and grenade attacks and all sorts of things that most other European countries don't have. She said that there are too many people living in parallel communities by their own belief systems, and they're not integrated into society. And she talked about how Sweden had failed. Sweden has failed to integrate the vast numbers of immigrants it brought over in the migrant crisis of 2015. I think it's about time a Swedish politician came out and said that and drew a link between that migrant crisis and what's currently happening in Sweden. We have to be honest about these things. We have to be honest about the division and tensions that can be caused by bringing in large numbers of immigrants with no policy of integration. And I think that's the problem Sweden currently faces.
No policy of integration. I think there was an assumption that you didn't need to integrate at all. In fact, it would be better if we had what's sort of militant multiculturalism, which is a sort of tribalizing influence in our societies. You could live side by side and all be sweet. I think that's just such a mirage, such a phony thing. And of course, these experiments take generations to undo. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much for your time.